Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Saturday morning show. We are going to be talking about net zero lettings this morning. Will they ever happen? And what does it really mean for landlords? So, I think really, firstly, if we cast our mind back to 2022, and people will remember there was a loud fanfare of really levelling up the UK's rental homes as part of the government's target to reach net zero by 2050. And back then, the rhetoric was that all tenancies created from the end of 2025 would then need to meet a higher energy efficiency standard. And with any exiting tenancies, the existing tenancies, they would have up to 2028 to catch up. So that's just obviously to make people aware of what was supposed to be in place. Following that announcement, some landlords really did get a wee bit. I mean, it put some people on edge, and some landlords sold up to avoid the cost of the improvements for EPCs and things. And that then further shriveled down an already short supply of homes in the rental sector. And then we've seen rents rocket, and then it gave investors who had stayed huge uplifts in income and profit and things as well. I see you, a wee smile there, Jim.
Net zero lettings, I could end this show right now and say it's never going to happen.
I know. It's a can that's been kicked so far down the road, but we're going to break it down and look at the.
Yeah, well,
Scotland. We're going to look
there
at
is
the whole
there is a number of things that's got to happen to this, to net zero lettings. I mean, as you said, the new proposal was crap. I knew this was coming anyway, and I knew it was coming for the Scottish government as well. There was no way they were ever going to hit any targets, and it was going to put the private rented sector under even more pressure, even the social housing sector and the council housing sector as well, and even the private building sector. There's no way that we would get to net zero by the targets that they were saying. And I've seen this all before. 30 years of being in the private rented sector as a landlord, as an investor, and also being involved in housing overall and housing policy on a local level through my local authority, sitting on their housing partnership committee about strategic housing policy, has taught me to wait. Every single time. Do not rush in. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread.
Well, look what happened.
Well,
look what happened with
just
the
let me
LCI.
finish here. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread, definitely. And what it has taught me over the years is don't run in if the local authority says something or the government says something. Wait to see what happens, but be prepared just so you can get ready to get it done, because they'll always take a light touch approach to implementation. Everybody else, look at landlord registration today. I bet there's landlords still not even registered from the very point that landlord registration came into play, I think in 2009. So since 2009, I bet there's some landlords still not registered, and they've not done anything about it at all. And you know what happens when that landlord gets, well, for want of a better phrase, caught? They go, could you go and just register, please?
Yeah.
Nothing. 15 years have passed, and we've all paid our fees, and we've all abided by the legislation. And the landlord that's deliberately circumvented it and not registered has just got away with it scot-free. Yeah.
And there's no repercussions on that or
No,
reprimand.
there's no like pay your back duties or anything like that. Like the tax man says, it's like, oh, go and just register. And it's like, and I'm thinking, God Almighty. I abide by the legislation. I make sure I'm one of the best landlords I can be. I provide my tenants with a real good high standard of service. If anything needs fixed, I'll just put my hand in my pocket. Well, I don't even put my hand in my pocket. It's just a fund that pays for it all the time. And that's literally it. Because I understand that that's what I need to do as a landlord. So you've got a duty and responsibility, and a responsibility of care towards your tenant. You're housing someone, and you're also housing possibly a family as well. It's like, why would you not? You're responsible for these people and their welfare while they're living in your property. I'm not talking about their behaviour. I'm just talking about looking after them by what you're providing. And that's what a landlord should be doing. And that's what most landlords do. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
When I was asked to put a number, I actually asked England. They'd come to me and said, "Look, do you want to come to a landlord conference and all the rest of it? It's all about antisocial landlords and all their behaviour." And I said, "Well, how many landlords are there in England?" And they went, "Well, probably about 2 million." And then I said, my next question was, so how many rogue landlords do you think? Because this is what it's all about catching the rogue landlords. And I thought he was going to write back to me and say probably about 500,000. They reckon it could be rogue. 20,000. Sorry?
A very small percentage of.
Sorry, just let me work that out. 20,000 divided by 2 million as a percentage is less than 1% almost.
Point something.
It's like, what? You're going to have a conference to try and spend all that money and all that resources and all that time to try and find or want a better phrase, catch 20,000 landlords in the whole England out of 2 million. And you think this is a fundamental problem? That's not significant.
No.
And this is the same with the net zero thing. It's the exact same thing. If anything's taught me anything, it's wait to see what happens. Look what I did with the EICRs.
EICRs, the hardwired smoke alarms.
Hardwired smoke alarm. EICRs, I ran out and changed every single consumer box on my property to composite boxes with RCD protector switches, and then they said, "Oh, actually, we've changed their mind. It's going to be metal boxes." So I've just spent the best part of tens of thousands of pounds changing them all to composite. Now you're telling me it should be metal.
Yeah.
And then it's the same with the hardwire smoke alarms. Every single house, hardwire smoke alarms, trunking up the side, all the rest of it. And then they say, "Oh well, we've changed their mind. You could actually just do interlinked radio signals with no hardwired."
Yeah, you could do the remote censored with the lithium batteries now.
So I disrupted and spent all this money on all these different things on the premise of being an excellent landlord and a really good landlord as a result of that. And lo and behold, it cost me an absolute fortune to do it. So if anything over the period of time has taught me is just sit on your hands for a while and see what happens. Clearly, if it's a criminal legislation thing they're putting in place, like gaff safe standards, don't wait to see what happens with that. No, you have to do that. EICRs are a perfect example of that as well. If anything did happen and I hadn't done it, then there would have been hell to pay. And it would have been a criminal conviction and possibly even worse, corporate manslaughter. So this is why you've got to do this. So, but leveling up and all the rest of it, it's a completely different picture. One of the things we're going to talk about, they have been scrapped, but we're going to talk about leaving existing landlords and would-be landlords with questions like, is leveling up rental homes gone for good? You know, should you still make improvements or wait for the law to be implemented? Can you make upgrades while your property is tenanted? That's a really good one. Because a lot of people actually think, I'll wait till my property is empty. All right, so you're going to annoy your tenant, frustrate your tenant with the fact that you're not doing anything about your property, and then just wait till they finally move out once they've got annoyed with the fact that you're not doing anything at your property. That's like a catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just do something. Get your agreement from your tenant. That's the best way. We'll talk about that more. Will greater energy efficiency get you that higher rent? And the final one for us is it really still worth being a landlord? So listen out for that at the end. Is it really worth being a landlord? I've got a really good insight into is it really worth being a landlord? Because I question myself every single day about this. Why am I doing this? What am I doing it for? Should I not just sell up and take the money and run? I go through that every single day almost, or every single other day, about should I still be a landlord right now? And I've been a landlord for 30 years and I've seen it come and go. And I tell you what, when we started out, it was like the Wild West. But now it's a bit more legitimized, but it's almost like dare I say Stalag 17. It's like it's like you're kept under comprehensive restrictions every single time.
Yeah.
You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, and you're castigated and vilified and demonized as a landlord by the rest of society, and it's driven by the government. The government, the rhetoric from the government, it comes out from politicians trying to get votes, trying to do vote winners, because we're in a minority in comparison to everybody else. Now, don't get the fiddles out, Ross. Don't get your wee fiddle out, Ross. You're no longer in power, by the way, from the Green Party. Don't get your fiddle out, pal. We don't. You can leave it alone. You don't bleed for us if you don't want to. But the reality is, you do question yourself: is it really worth being a landlord? Why do you not just take the money? Stick it in your pension, have a great life, sit on the beach, drink pina coladas for the rest of your days, and you've got no bother at all ever again. So why bother being a landlord? That's a really good question. That'll come to
Just going
work
to
for
say
you.
that's probably one of the best questions we've covered today. And
Yeah,
I
I'll
think
give you a real
that
good insight into whether it's worth being a landlord or not. And actually, there's different levels of landlord as well. That's the real thing. I've got somebody there saying, "No, I'm getting out as soon as my tenant moves out. Sick of the rules and regulations on TikTok."
I was just going to say that.
That's one of the most positive responses I've ever had on TikTok from a TikTok person.
It's something we hear time and time again, though. That, and like you say, Jim, the restrictiveness of the, I mean, the legislation's there for a purpose, but do you know, there's just so much being put onto landlords, and restrictions just make people feel like, why am I doing this? And they look at their own situation and really, is it worth them being a landlord anymore? And today,
Also, it costs an absolute fortune. When you put the restrictions on, all that happens is you have to put the price up of the rent in order to accommodate for the extra work that you're having to do. It's just like for like. It's proportionately increased because of that. It's the same with a letting agent. As you get more regulation put on you and more restrictions put on you about what you need to look after, you have to put labour into that, which is the biggest cost in a letting agency, and training as well as a result of that, which is the biggest cost in a letting agency. And therefore, guess what? You're going to have to get that back somehow. It has to come from the landlord, and the landlord says, "Well, if you're going to have to charge me for that, I'm going to have to put my rent up, and it's going to be worth. It's going to be not going to be worth renting anymore." I may as well just sell and put the money in the bank, have an easy life.
Yeah,
because they're giving great returns just now.
Yeah, I know, and that's something again we see time and time again, especially with, like you say, we have to retrain and things as well, and our costs change, and it just has a knock-on effect. But today, with regards to the net zero, and we're going to be reviewing the original proposal, exploring where it is now,
Yeah.
and then examining what's best for you and your investment. And like you said, Jim, first we're going to look at, is levelling up rental homes, has it gone for good? So
yeah, okay. What's your thoughts on it, Richard?
yeah, I think, well, the UK holds a dubious honour of having Europe's oldest housing stock, and the levelling up agenda aims to really rectify that with homes, so that they're warm and comfortable and efficient. But there are different approaches, and that's north and south of the border. Right? So just to kind of recap, in England and Wales, the proposal was to raise the minimum rating of the energy performance certificate to a band C, from the current E, and there was fines in place or proposed to be in place of £30,000 for non-compliance.
Yeah.
In Scotland, a consultation period ended in March 2024 on improving EPC ratings via a heat and buildings bill. Things will now move to an independent analysis.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
In September 2023, the requirements to raise EPC bands to band C was scrapped, with landlords being encouraged instead to upgrade where possible, like using the boiler scheme.
Why do you think I ran out and bought 30 properties? And a lot of them were below the C rating, because I knew this was never going to happen. I knew it was never going to happen. And if it was going to happen, I had played the downside, and I thought I could get this up to C standard quite easily. And I am progressively working towards that anyway. But the landlord that was actually offloading them was terrified. And they just wanted to offload them because they had this sitting over their head, and they couldn't afford to do the upgrades, whereas I could. But I tell you what, that's about £500,000 I've made out of that, just on that purchase. Just alone, that's about £500,000 I've made on that purchase of 30 properties, all because of the legislation. So, I've got to say, thank you, Patrick Harvey. Thanks very much. You've made me £500,000 because you've scared all the landlords, and they've run for the hills, and they've offloaded their stock as a result, and therefore I've been in a perfect position to take advantage of that. It's the classic example, isn't it, when you're property investing? Warren Buffett talks about all the time. Don't buy when it's going up, buy when it's coming down. And that's the classic example. This is, God, somebody was trying to get this out of me on social media the other day or yesterday. They were like, says, is interest rates going to make any difference to what you're doing, or do you think it's going to go up or down? And I went, well, nothing will change. Nothing will change before the end of the year, I don't think. And I'm playing on this scenario. And that was it. And then they started to go on about what evidence do you have and all the rest of it. I went, I'm not here to question. It's no question time. You asked me a question, I gave you your answer. That's the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
If you wanted that answer in the first place, you should have asked a better question. There's a point. Ask a better question.
Ask a better question.
Every single time. So the question about September 23 requirement, the reason raising the upgrade of the EPCs to the Band C was definitely scrapped. It was never going to be there. No one was ever going to get this. And it was, in order to, here's the key here. When you look at things like that, there was no way they were ever going to police it. They just don't have the resources to police that. So therefore, it would have run amok, and they would have had to put even more money. So in a utopian world, about saying this, we could do this, is going to happen. They have no idea about the ramifications of what comes next. And when they started to work out what had to happen next in order for this EPC banding to get there in the sea, then they realised it's the amount of money and investment they'd have to spend in policing it.
Yeah.
And then that's when they thought, oh God, this is unworkable. We can't do this. And in order to get people on what we're going to do, and there's no legislation in place. See how this limited thinking by the government that we have just now. And I'm not talking necessarily about the English government. I'm talking about the Scottish government. The Scottish government in power just now have no idea. They're limited. Their thinking's so limited. They don't understand the full ramifications about what they do and how it would affect other people. They've just not got any commercial acumen about them.
Yeah. And as you say there, obviously, the Band C requirements was scrapped, and they've brought in this upgrade where possible, with the boiler upgrade scheme and things. But does that really mean that the story's over? Do you know, that's what people are like, okay, was that fine then? It was fine. So, I mean, that really is the $64,000 question. Do you know what I mean? However, given that net zero targets for 2025 do remain, the direction of travel maybe does seem clear that we're still trying to head towards that target. So, is it still possible that some softer, more pragmatic, and easier to deliver legislation may eventually emerge?
No.
You're not convinced, no.
No, because they can't do things by short measures. There's no in between when it comes to for the government to actually think about this, about the light touch approach. They don't understand what they're doing. It's either all or nothing. They don't have any strategy to communicate with the landlords either. They think just communicating with Sal, and it's fantastic that they communicate with Sal and John.
Yeah.
But John can't be the eyes and ears for all the landlords in Scotland. There's about 250,000 to 300,000 landlords in Scotland. So how on earth? And Sal's not got that much of a membership, so they can only take a result based on what they're thinking. And because we're so disseminated, 94% of landlords in Scotland, for example, only have one property. 5% have two properties, and then 1% have three or more. So I'm in a 1% bracket, which is very in a minority in the number of landlords in Scotland. And then how are you going to communicate with all these landlords in Scotland all at once? It's practically impossible and not cost effective to do. So this is why the government has this draconian attitude about, I tell you what, if we get rid of all the private landlords and bring it all into one person, one organisation running it all, then we'll be happy days. That's the banks.
Yeah.
Aye, that's the banks. This is like asking the fox to look after the hen coop. Asking the banks to get involved in the private rented sector. This is like asking the fox to look after the hen coop. A fox is a fox, and regardless of what the fox says, the fox will do what a fox does, and it's eat hens. That's the reality. And so, if you ask a bank or an investment house to get involved in the private rented sector, what do you think the primary concern of a bank and investment house is? To make profit. Make profit. And yet, you're all going on about, even the government goes on about, it's terrible, these people, private landlords making profit. They make nothing in comparison to what these investment houses will make. They will bleed people dry, wring them out completely. Do you know what, when I say bleed them dry, they'll not bleed them dry. They'll keep them alive just enough to keep bleeding them slowly over time. Yeah. That's what they'll do. And the government will hail it as a revelation. And in years to come, we'll look back and think, oh my God, what did we do? I've seen it all before.
Yeah, it's the same approach and things that people are stuck in, like with credit cards and things like that. they could get by, but they're stuck paying these high amounts for a long periods of time, and the companies make a fortune
That's
out
the
of it.
point. That's what loan
Yeah,
sharks do. That's what the
yeah,
credit card companies, the small loans do. They just
yeah.
want to bleed you enough to get enough out of you every single week because their profits go up sky high as a result of that. But they've got millions of people doing that. Look at, for example, Virgin Media. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not wanting to pick on Richard, but Richard's Virgin comes to mind. Or Sky. Let's take Sky. I'm no big fan of Sky for a few back and forward with them about billing and stuff like that. But look at Sky. If Sky want to increase their bottom line, all they need to do is say maybe 5 million subscribers to Sky, possibly something like that. Just say 5 million. If they want to make an extra 5 million a month, all they need to do is put their subscription at £1.
£1, yeah.
That's 5 million a month straight on their bottom line. That's 60 million a year just by putting their subscription up £1 a month. That's exactly what their corporate landlords will be doing. That's exactly what your banks will be doing as well. They keep people alive enough to bleed them every single time. That's not what private landlords do, in my experience. Private landlords give up their holidays, they give up their own personal savings in order to do things to their properties, to make sure their tenants look after. They're the ones that actually care. Sometimes they don't show it in the right way because we are different. You know, one person speaks Venetian, other person speaks Martian, and
Yeah.
that's the way it goes in terms of tenants and landlords. However, if you learn to speak the other person's language, there's a symbiotic relationship that can be had there between a landlord and tenant. But in the landlord will basically spend as much as they can in order to look after the tenant. The majority of landlords will do that. You'll get people that go, "Oh, my landlord did this." It's like, well, let's look at your track record then. And then when you look at the tenant's track record, it's like, ooh, you don't open your windows, you dry everything on your radiators, you don't look after your property. When you spill something on the carpet, you never clear it up. You never open the windows when you cook or when you have a shower. You know, we could easily put accusations back and forward, but that doesn't get anybody anywhere, and it's a small minority of tenants and small minority of landlords that do that. So the magic question is, should I still make improvements or just wait for the law? What's your thoughts on this, Richard?
Yeah, well, you made a good point, and what we experienced with the EICRs and all those upgrades, and we ran out and done them quickly, and then things changed. A lot of people have probably experienced the same. Now, given that the new legislation for net zero and energy efficiency improvements is now off the cards, deciding whether and when to improve your property's energy efficiency depends on your specific situation, I would say.
Yeah.
Now, assuming that you're going to keep your rental home for a long term, the questions you need to be asking are probably, do you have sufficient money coming in with enough left over to make changes without falling into maybe financial hardship or difficulty?
So let's analyze this one at a time then.
Yeah.
So do you have enough sufficient money coming in?
Yeah.
Most landlords don't make that much money out of property. I've even heard some landlords just saying, if I can just cover the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Geez, you should not be a landlord.
Heard that
It's like if you say, can I just cover the mortgage? Because you're not doing your tenant any favours if you can just cover the mortgage. I see it. I actually see it so many times on landlords forums. It's not just about covering the mortgage. It's about getting the right return in order to reinvest back in the property to make sure the tenant is looked after and make sure you can do all these repairs and improvements if you need to.
Yeah.
So yes, over a period of time, when you invest in property, it should not really, unless you do the strategy like me and you do for cash every single month, which is the strategy that I use every single time. And the long-term wealth will accumulate regardless of anything that happens. So the cash flow is king, and you can look after your properties every single time. Most people go into this about, oh, I'm wanting to put a nest egg, so I'm going to invest in the property, and they buy it far too high, and the return isn't as good, and the cash flow doesn't come in very well every single month. Hence the reason why they get to the end of the year, and they're kind of just paying off their tax bill, and they've literally got a few £100s left. But the price of the value of the property has gone up, and they go, yeah, I've made money. But they've not made money until you've realised the gain. That's the only way you make money, being a landlord. But it's a long-term strategy for people like that, and they think if I just leave it alone, but you've still got to make the money to reinvest back in, or it's going to come out of your pocket eventually anyway. So that's the strategy that you shouldn't have, because then when you do need that, you're going to run into financial difficulty. Exactly what you said. It's, you know, you are going to run into financial difficulty. What's the next one we've got to talk about then? What's the next question you would ask?
Well, as you say there, Jim, some landlords, or a lot of landlords, don't make a lot of money. So how much extra rent could you get with maybe major insulation and energy efficiency improvements, either from maybe your existing tenant, or possibly by serving notice, and then making the upgrades and then reletting it at obviously a higher market rent?
I'll be honest, don't serve notice on your tenant.
That would be my advice as well.
Serving notice on your tenant is a very last resort. It's the last resort of any resort. Eviction is always to be avoided at all costs, unless they're deliberately not paying their rent, and you've no other way out of this. They're antisocial towards their neighbours, and I mean antisocial behaviour orders have been served by the necessary people, in other words, the police and the courts and stuff like that, so you've got evidence to that. Or they're continually damaging the property beyond repair, and it's vindictive. That's probably the only three situations I would ever see. You know, if you're looking to move into it eventually, I'm not really sure if you should buy it actually just to move into it later on. I mean, I'm doing that anyway, but that might actually be taken away for you in the future, because there's a thought on the horizon about if you want to sell a tenanted property or a let property that you'd be using, if you want to sell it on the open market, you can only sell it to another landlord. This is what the thought is in the legislation. And if you have that, therefore your property will no longer be market value anymore. It'll be a lot less. So prepare yourself for that. You know, brace yourself, because it's coming. I think it's going to be coming. I think at some point in time we're going to get some legislation that says you can only sell to another landlord, and you can't move into it yourself.
I knew there was kind of talks about changes in how you would be able to sell your tenanted or a tenanted or a let property, but I never really heard the ins and outs of.
This is regulated tenancies back in 1988 when they did it. They did the regulated tenancies, where they actually said you can only move a tenancy value. The person's got a lifetime tenancy, PRT. They've got a lifetime tenancy, but you can only move the rent up by a certain amount every single year, and the rent assessor has to determine that. Therefore, when the market rent is sitting at £1,000, you're only getting £500 for that house. And that makes it like a commercial let, because it's restricted based on that principle. So it's tied to that. It's a tied sort of regulated tenancy. So therefore, you're restricted in your rent increase. The person can stay in it for life, and the next generation can stay in it for life as well. So you'll never get it back. And these type of tenancies were selling for half the price, these properties. Garbage Paper Mill was a classic example. All their properties were regulated tenancies. And when I went to buy them and put an offer in, this is how I learned all about it. Because basically, all these houses were worth about 120 grand, and they could only sell them for about 70,000. Because it was lifetime tenancies. You were having to take over a property with a rent, which was like £400 a month when the market rent was £900. So therefore, you were having to take it over at £400, and this person had lifetime tenancy in it, and they just retired from the paper mill at 65-year-old. So likelihood is for 25 years you're going to have a restricted rent on this, and you couldn't do anything about it at all. That's why it brought it right down in value. So be aware of that.
Yeah.
What if you don't have enough cash reserves right now to pay for the improvements? Are you really comfortable increasing your mortgage to cover the cost, or is it worth it? That's a thought, eh? Yeah, definitely. So I think we're talking about if you're thinking about that, if you don't have enough cash reserves and
I think that
pay for your improvements,
definitely. I mean, if you've not got enough cash reserves,
increasing your mortgage to cover the costs, it's really worth it. I think you're cutting in and out, Richard. I seem to have a perfect signal at my end, so I'm just losing you now and again. So I would say improving. You've got it's really cash reserves. You've got to think about that. You've got to think about the cost. You've got to think about how much you've got to pay for improvements. You've got to keep something in the kitty, and that's why I think you should always put money aside regardless. If you think you're going to be going on a holiday and then you've got something to fix, you really can't go on your holiday. I think it's down to that. I mean, the good news is if you now have more time to improve your property's energy efficiency, it means you can spread the work over a period of time and the cost longer and the financial impact, which is what we are doing when we come to refurbs, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so will greater energy efficiency get you a higher rent? That's the thing you've got to think about just now. So will that get you a higher rent overall? So we're looking at that right now. Every tenant wants a warm and comfortable home without exorbitant bills. But basically, what will happen is they will pay more rent for those advantages overall, won't they, Richard? So every tenant. So what I'm saying is every tenant wants a warm and comfortable home without exorbitant bills, but they will have to pay more rent for those advantages. And yes, they will get them, and they're already due for several reasons. But well, that's a magic question that you should answer, Richard, because you're the letting agent. You've got boots on the ground. You understand that. Will you get a higher rent for energy efficiency, or will the tenant just never notice it? Is it making an impact?
You would be surprised the amount of tenants now who are very energy efficiency conscious. And I remember when I first started doing lettings, and obviously EPCs were in place and they were relatively new, and you had to put the EPC rating and things. And I used to do move-ins with the EPC, and people didn't even know what they were or look at them at all.
Yeah.
Now people are very more conscious of let's see what the energy efficiency rating is, because it's going to have a direct effect on their bills and what their utility costs are going to be. If they've not got enough insulation, they're going to be paying lots of extra heating and things as well. And it's true what you say. If all these improvements have been made and there's a good boiler in place, there's good insulation in place and things, then yes, you could command a higher rental, because they're going to have less utility bills. I mean, a cold and leaky home that's expensive to run will never get the highest possible rent, but it will encourage a higher turnover of tenants, as they will always be looking out for something that's more comfortable. And then
that's exactly the same. That's exactly the same scenario with the 30 I've just bought now, isn't it?
Yep.
A lot of them have been run down over the years. I mean, they're bought about 20 years ago with the existing landlord, and then they've passed them on to me, more or less all run down. They've never really put a huge improvement into them. Therefore, I'm having to spend an absolute fortune upgrading them and improving them, and that's had a huge effect. But I'm prepared to do that because I know that it will add significant value to the properties. But also, we've noticed systematically that maybe three or four tenants have actually started to move out. And then you've told me, you then come back to me and says, well, the rent's actually probably about 150 to £200 more a month. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Sorry? It's like, really? Wow. Now, I get my calculator every single time. If somebody says to me the rent's another 150 quid a month, I then take 150, multiply it by 12. It gives me £1,800. I divide it by 0.1, which is 10%. I could spend £18,000 on improvements here and get an instant 10% return on that money. And that £18,000 as well will go into the property to actually pay, to actually increase the value of the property as well, the capital value. So I've got a increase in capital, because I know it will, because they're completely run down. Increasing £18,000 in the capital value of the property, definitely. It'll probably be a bit more actually, because it's a refurb when you think about it for 18 grand. And then you've got a 10% return on the extra rent that you'll be getting for that property. Yeah. I'll do that any day. I worked out years and years ago when I had 159. And then what I realised is the big, huge open plan, which is really just 2 rooms, the living room and the dining room off to the back. And then I just put a stud partition up. And stud partition cost me £1,000, but the rent went up by £100 a month. And it's like, okay, £1,000, and I'm going to get £1,200 extra a year. So that's an 83% return on my money. Cha-ching, I'll do that any day. And I've now got a 3-bedroom instead of 2. Why would I not do that? This is what people don't think about, the dynamics about how to do this and what you should be thinking about in terms of your investment return. They just look at a bill and think, it's going to cost me £18,000. But wait a minute, what rent could you get?
Yeah.
And then work that out, the additional cost and additional return that you're going to get. And the £18,000 you've got sitting somewhere else, it's like in the bank, it's earning maybe 2% or at the best. Then you're going to get a 10% return on it. Why would you not do that then? No brainer.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a no brainer here. But you're absolutely right, and it's like when we look in comparison, Jim, to those new purchases to your existing portfolio. I mean, the difference in property standards and just everything.
But then that's who I first started out, remember? I started out with a portfolio like that. It was completely not a portfolio like that, completely run down. I started out buying a lot of repossessions.
Yeah.
There were a lot of repossessions that were run to the ground, and I did them all up before somebody moved in. So I give them a beautiful property, all decorated and carpeted throughout. And at that time, I was doing furnished. It was completely furnished with all the brand new stuff, down to the cutlery as well. So that's what I was giving everybody. The other thing to think about is will you get a greater higher rent? I mean, even before the Ukraine, energy price shocks had actually gone around the world, and volatile costs were changing in a heartbeat in terms of the cost itself, making everyone far more conscious about their consumption and what they're spending every single month. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It costs you an absolute arm and a leg sometimes to pay for utility bills. So this is a big thing. And think about the cost of just changing a boiler. I mean, most boilers nowadays are into the realms of, they're maybe wall mounted. So you get the old Baxi boilers wall mounted in a kitchen or something like that. I mean, yours was a good example in your house. When we had that, we had an old Baxi, with a 55% energy efficiency. So then we changed it to a condenser combi boiler, which was a 95% efficiency. Now, when you think about the amount of money, so 55% efficiency means that every pound of energy that the person consumes means they're losing 45 pence in money in terms of return. So we took it to a 95% boiler, and so every pound that goes in, they're only losing 5%. So they're saving an absolute fortune. They're using less energy as a result. So they're saving an absolute fortune every single month. Now, that gets you a higher rent, and maybe, I don't know, just say, for argument's sake, 50 quid a month. There's £600 a year. What did it cost to change that boiler? Well, at that time, it's 1,500 quid. So 600 divided by 1,500 is 40% return. I rest my case.
Yeah.
Why does no one think like this? Why does no one think like this? You get an extra 50 quid for spending £1,500 on a new wall-mounted boiler at that time. You're getting an extra 600 quid a year, so you're getting a 40% return, plus the fact that you're putting a new boiler in. It'll go into the capital value of the property as well. Therefore, your money's banked in the property value, and you're getting a 40% return on that investment. This is why people come on and go, when they go on about investment returns, I go, well, I would be disappointed if it's below 15 or 20%. I'd be pretty disappointed in my return if I wasn't getting that. And folk are going, you're having a laugh, you're kidding. I'm showing you right there exactly how it's done.
Yeah.
Every money you put in, you just investment return. I was trained like this, remember, in accountancy and manufacturing as a management accountant. Whatever you're putting in, cost benefit analysis. What is your payback? What is your return? How quick can you get that money back when you invest it? This is what this is all about. This is exactly the same scenario when you come to property as well. And you take the emotion out of it, that's what it's all about. But clearly, obviously, there's decisions that you have to make for your tenant now and again, which are in the interest of the tenant, and you just have to suck it up and spend it.
I think that's an important point as well, Jim, when you say to take the emotion out of it and really put a business head on it sometimes as well. I mean, it's always important to have that element of empathy and things as well in any situation, but when you're dealing with a situation like that, definitely take emotion out of it and think. That makes you think a lot more clearly. But with regards to, tenants' approach to properties that are more energy efficient and have extra insulation and a good condenser boiler or whatever, they definitely would pay more. And that is influenced by the utility costs and things and their view on that. Now, while we're powerless for the influence of the price on oil and gas and things as well, we can take measures at home to make decisions about where we live and the need for less energy and have more control over our bills. And I think people are, like you say, Jim, with the knock-on effect from the price, obviously the war in Ukraine and the costs on utilities, people are very more conscious of that.
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting, a gentleman said on TikTok the other night about investment return. 60 grand invested in the Standard & Poor's index for 32 years at 10% compounding comes to 1.3 million. He's absolutely right. Or she's absolutely right, that person. And it just shows you. So why on earth would you then go to the effect of spending all that money and investing in a property and getting all the hassle from a tenant? If you could just do that with 60 grand, put in Standard & Poor's for 32 years, 10% return. Now, remember, Standard & Poor's 500 is the top 500 companies earning the top money. So some drop out and some drop in based on what it is. And if you've got to invest in that, you'll always increase. I mean, the FTSE is going up to 8,400, breaking records every single day now. I made 20 grand in the last 3 weeks. And I've not done anything. I could just cash in now. But I won't, because as a pension, I'm not really bothered about it. I just like playing the game, I suppose. But when you see returns like that, you kind of think, why am I involved in property now? We could argue that every single time, can't we?
Yeah, definitely. And just to recap as well, I think given that more tenants are ever more conscious and considering energy efficiency when choosing the rental home, you can say with quite certainty that when a property falls behind the times, its rental value does too.
Absolutely. And so does its occupancy rate as well.
Yep.
The turnover of tenants gets a lot more, doesn't it? Therefore, you're only getting 11 months or maybe 10 months rent every single year out of this property. And then you're having to deal with a tenant that it doesn't look after the property as much as maybe a really good tenant you could attract as a result of having the right energy efficiency, the right standard of quality of property as well. There's a huge, it's like night and day, trying to really appeal to the bottom end of the market is not the market you should be at. And I've learned that over the years, from the very beginning, the hard way. So just believe me when I say you don't want to do that. You think it's easy money, but it's not. It's not. It's a lot of heartache, and it's a lot of being a social worker for people as a result of that. So here's the $64 million question: can you make upgrades for your properties tenanted, Richard?
Yeah, and one of the concerns for landlords around the upgrades for energy efficiency of their rental home is that the spectre of the lost income from needing their property to be empty to carry out the work. So fortunately, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. So it's worth exploring a few things before really dismissing the idea. So your energy performance certificate will include suggestions for upgrades that you can make to improve your energy efficiency rating. So that's your first port of call. Have a look at your EPC.
I ignore that completely. Well, you know fine when you look at these EPCs and you look at the things about, we'll put solar panels, ground source heat pumps, and it's like, and you'll maybe make, and then it goes, you'll make 200 quid a year saving.
Yeah, I think it's important that you know how to. I think it's important that you know how to read the EPC and take the information from it, and that you've had a really reputable person carry the EPC out. I mean, he no longer does it anymore. Colin Bramwell was really good. I used to pick up the phone to Colin, and he would give me advice about energy efficiency and how to make the right upgrades and things in a property without busting the bank and making things better energy efficiency wise. So make sure you've got a really competent person.
The two things that you could do right now, which will be the biggest impact, is LED lighting.
Yep.
And a condenser combi boiler, or a condenser system boiler, whatever it is, as long as you're not making too much disruption to the property. And I mean, if you've got an old back boiler, it's a bit more difficult because then you've got to take the boiler out. You might actually just paint the boiler and disconnect it, reroute the pipes, and actually just leave the fire in place just now and just say you can't use it. That's all. Because it does mean the disruption of taking everything out, the guts out, and then skimming it, bricking it up and skimming it off, and then having to paint the whole wall. And a tenant might not like that, but they might like the idea you just rerouting the pipe work and putting the boiler somewhere else. Often, a lot of times, people put them in the attic now. A lot of the engineers, because you've got remote wireless working for your heating. So these are kind of the two things that are easy, low hanging fruit to make really good savings.
That can make a big difference.
All the tenants in situ. And the very fact that you're doing that, the tenant goes, wow, my landlord's looking after me. Just for doing that. But you know, and I know that this is a great addition to improving the value of the property. So if you go for a new mortgage, what happens is if you go for a remortgage because your fixed rate period is out, here's a wee one here. If you go for a new mortgage because your fixed rate period is up, they then go, right, we'll get new valuations of your property. Then you've increased the value of the property. Therefore, your loan to value is a lot less. If you're not remortgaging, if you're just putting on a new deal, your loan to value is a lot less, therefore your interest rate's less as well, and your EPC's higher, and you also get a discount for that as well now.
Yeah.
So there's method in the madness to do that. So think about bigger picture thinking. This is what this is all about.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's a lot of things you can do that are minimal disruption to your tenant, and improvements around the house, like maybe draft excluders, insulating the loft and the loft hatch, floors and cavity wall insulation, and installing maybe water restrictors and heating thermostats. This could all be done with really minimum disruption to your tenant. When it comes to more substantial work, like possibly replacing the windows or adding insulation to internal walls, you might want to maybe schedule that. You could even schedule it around your tenant's holiday, or when they're not going to be in the property, or if tenants work away and things like that. You know, speak to your tenant, try and work something out, rather than think, oh, I'm going to have the property empty, because you're going to have the expense of the improvement, you're going to have the void period, you're going to have the relet. Do you know, it's a lot to think about, and some people don't maybe register the loss that they're going to incur by having the tenant out, and then
we've had it recently. I mean, we did a couple of properties. We replaced the kitchen, and then we replaced the heating. We also replaced the bathrooms as well in some of our properties while the tenant was still in situ. Now, we got the agreement from the tenant. They were happy as Larry to get that done. Some of them weren't. It's like, you know, oh, I've got nowhere to shower now. I went, but you work at the bus station, do you know? It's like the bus station has showers. Yeah. Well, there you go then. So would you want, or I tell you what, we'll no bother doing it then. It's like, well, we're going to put a new bathroom in. Where am I going to shower? Oh, well, we'll no bother doing it then. But I'm wanting a new bathroom. Well, there you go then. So if you want to work it out, we've got to work on something. Are you a member at a local golf club or a gymnasium? Oh, I go to the gym every single day. Well, you've got showers down there.
Mm-hmm.
But see how blinkered people get when they get into a conflict situation. They don't want to look at any other variables and any other challenges about how they solve this. They just want to look at how it's difficult for them, and their life is having to be disrupted as a result of it. Well, I'm offering you a new bathroom, or a new kitchen, or a new heating system. I can wait till you eventually move out, or we can do it while you're in here. Which one do you want? And let's have a workable solution for it, so we can do it for you. Well, I want it done in one day. Well, it's not going to happen in one day, is it? It's like, we've still got to put the tiles on. We've still got to wait for everything to set before you put the bath in. You've got to let it settle. You've got to put the edging round. And it's like all these different things. So if you're a tenant, please be aware and just be happy that the fact that your landlord is actually going to be doing these improvements for you, and work around it, and you know, have a symbiotic relationship, because you want the landlord to keep doing that over the years, because you'll be better as a result of it.
The really important thing is to speak to your tenant, and I think with any work, whether how small or how big it is, there's going to be some element of disruption. So everybody involved needs to be obviously wise to that fact. But there is a lot you can do, and keeping your tenant in place not only protects your income, but also saves you the cost, like I said, of finding a new tenant, and that includes referencing, inventories, safety checks. You know, there's so much involved in that, and you really need to.
Which could run into anything from £500 to £15,000.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, if your tenant moves out and your place isn't that brilliant in terms of decoration and carpets and all the rest of it, you're probably going to have to do all that work anyway as a result of it. So why would you just do it with the tenant in situ? Unless you know the tenant systematically destroys your property. And that's probably why it's like that in the first place. Because it's probably been a brand new kitchen they had maybe 5 years ago, and now there's nothing left of it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's no point in actually putting a new kitchen in because of that. That's one you've got to think about. You've got to be realistic about that as a landlord. You've got to think logically and think to yourself, has the tenant actually been looking after the property, rather than actually just going, okay, I'll just change it and I'll just change it and I'll just change it. Because I tell you, it'll end up being a money pit. You may as well just take the fire guard away from the fire and just throw the money in the fire. Because we've had some, you know, I wouldn't say it's been often, but once in a blue moon, someone comes along, or you inherit another property you've bought with another tenant, and you kind of think to yourself, I'm no surprised they're not doing any work in that property, because the tenant's no bother. They don't understand how to live properly.
Yeah.
It's an education thing. They don't understand they need to open their windows and let it vent and all the rest of it. They keep saying it's rising damp, and it's like it's no rising damp. It's just condensation.
You need to let
We've had
air
that
in.
many. We've had that many specialists in the door. They've sent the reports to them. They keep saying the same thing. It's like, this is a specialist that knows what they're talking about, and your opinion is valued more than the specialist. Really? So that's what you've got to think about when you come down to, is this something that you should do or something you should not do? On the face of it, most of the times, yeah, it's probably something that you should do.
Yeah. So with everything that we've covered in terms of obviously costs and legislation and everything that goes hand in hand with the net zero and obviously other elements of being a landlord, the question is it still worth being a landlord?
Absolutely not. Don't ever be a landlord. That would be my answer. Don't ever be a landlord, because it leaves it for me. That's all I want to say. Because the more, and nobody wants to be a landlord, the more desirable what I've got becomes as a natural result of that. That's why I would just say, don't ever be a landlord, Davatsky. No, I'd say that tongue in cheek, but the reality is, if you are going to be a landlord, make sure you understand how to do it right. Now, a lot of landlords are out there, and a lot of would-be investors are out there. A lot of people are out selling snake oil out there as well about how to be a landlord. So you've got to watch out for all this, and you've just got to be careful. Don't rush in where, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I can't say that enough. Get the right advice, get the right information, work your numbers, understand what your purchase price is, understand what the return is. Don't just take the word from it from a local letting agent. Worse, don't take the word from it from the sourcer that's trying to sell you the property. Do not take the word for it from the sourcer that's selling you the property, because they're just trying to sell the property and get a fee for it. It's in their interest to sell to you for that reason. Now, I remember I took over a lot of properties that were repossessed in the beginning, early 2000s, because of originally the sourcers, because they were just trying to sell properties and dump them into the market, and they were just trying to make money out of it. So sourcing's been on for years and years and years, and it's resurrected its ugly head again, I would say. And if it's done correctly, fair enough, it's done correctly. But I don't think
it's done correctly, then yes. But
yeah, I don't think the majority of people do it correctly. Because I look at a lot of their listings and a lot of the things that they're touting, they've not got any information to do with compliance in there or anything like that. Their insurance policies, their indemnity policy, their registration number for the property redress scheme. They've got none of that stuff in their listing when they're meant to. Even some landlords and letting agents that put adverts in do not have the EPC rating written in it when they're supposed to. They don't even have the landlord registration number in there either. And they don't even have the letting agent number in there either.
Letting agent registration, landlord registration, and your EPC. Can't list without them.
So they don't have any of that information in, and you see it on websites all the time from people, and they still don't have that in. So it tells me everything. How you do anything is how you do it. How you do everything is how you do anything. That's the reality.
Yeah.
And you could tell straight away if a letting agent isn't on the ball with that sort of thing, then you're not going to get the service when you need it. And I mean the service when you need it, because for most letting agents, everything will go swimmingly well, and everything will work well. But what you're really paying for, what I say to people, is when it all goes wrong, you need the letting agent on your side, because basically what you're doing is you're kind of paying an insurance policy when you're paying fees every single month, and you think it's money for old rope. But when anything goes wrong, you've got the letting agent on your side that you know is experienced enough to get that resolved quicker than any other letting agent, and more cost effective. That's what I tell everybody every single time. It's not about getting just the best letting agent. It's understanding the agent has got the most experience and expertise and skill in order to resolve a situation, or in order to make sure. The reason it's all going swimmingly well is probably because your letting agent is doing all the right things.
Yeah.
And you're thinking it's money for old rope, and you're going, I should maybe take this property back and do it myself. I've heard that. And then 3 months later, you go, oh my God, I wish I hadn't.
Everything's going well. I'll just do it myself. There's a reason it's going well. But
yeah,
I think
that's when you want the letting agent, when it's going well.
That was the purpose of it. But I think as well, letting agents and things that continually learn and are continually keeping up and retraining and putting into their sales and their team's knowledge of the legislation and things as well is so important. And I think when you hear of I think it's like it'd be a learn it all as opposed to a know it all.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so yeah, is it worth being a landlord? And I think there's no denying that the improvements for energy performance of your rental property will cost money. But does that mean you should give up being a landlord? So let's kind of break that down a wee bit. So Knight Frank, they done a study on 30,000 improved EPCs, and they showed the average cost of around £9,260 to go from a band E and your energy performance certificate to a band C. This was rewarded with a green premium, adding an 8.8%, £29,289 to a property's value. So you're just shy of 30,000 on your property's value because it was awarded this green premium from getting to a C rating. So there's one thing.
You spent £9,260.
Yeah.
The value of your property is going up by £30,000. So you've effectively got an increase of 33% in return. So you've got a 33% return on the investment you've just put in. But that 9,260 is now spent. That's invested to make £30,000. So that's a really good return straight away, a capital return. Therefore, in terms of your rent as well, your rent would probably go up as a result of that as well. So then you've got an additional return on top of that, which was the 8.8% that you're saying, about the, 8.8% is the property value, but you've got your additional rent, which was not got quantified here from this survey, but you've got the additional rent on top of that as well. So you've got an instant 30% odd return over and above that money you've just put in. And that's now the return that you've got banked. Actually, no, it's 200%. Yeah, 9,260, you're getting 30 grand out of it. So you're taking your 10 grand off, you've got a 20 grand increase. Therefore, that's about 200% return.
Yeah.
So
and it's like what you said.
Sign me up straight away.
Yeah. And it's just like what you said earlier. It's just like what you said earlier in the show, Jim, about doing the boiler and things and LED lights, whatever. It's banked in, the added value is then banked into the property.
So you've immediately got an uplift of 200% on return on your money that you've just put in and the value of your property you've on that money, that 9,260 you've got in. So you've got 200% return on that immediately. You don't get that every year. That's just a one-off. But then you've also got the appreciation on that money every single year either when property prices go up. The bank, and then you've got the increase in the rent as well. See how the compounding effect. It's not just rent. It's not just the increase on the return on your investment you're putting into the value, and then it's the capital. So you've got three different elements that you're actually improving on in here. And you've got four. Think about this. You've got four elements. Your first element here is the instant increase in the value of the property by the 9,260 you put in, which is 200%. The second one is the capital appreciation on that £30,000 every single year when the property prices go up over a period of time. The third one is the rental increase you'll get as a result of that for putting that investment in. And the fourth one is the decrease in the loan to value in the mortgage that you've got in the property, which gives you a better interest rate when you go to renew.
So that's 4 points.
Four different returns on investment just by improving your property there. 4 different returns on investment. And people talk about, I need to go and do some other multiple income stream thing here. Sorry, there's 4 there, just out of one thing you've just done there. What else do you need to do?
And that clearly demonstrates as well where people really don't pick up on this and don't think outside the box or the bigger picture, should I say.
Yeah.
Of making these improvements and spending that. I mean, what did you say? We said 9,260 there for an example.
No one. I don't think if everyone knew what I knew and I had a plug into my head and plug into their head for a download, and Elon Musk might make that happen one day. And if I can get all that out of my head and everybody else's head, everybody would be doing what I'm doing and buying property and how I'm doing it and the model I'm doing it and the blueprint that I'm using. They would be doing it every single time because it's I hate to say it's just a license to print money. Literally, a license to generate money every single month and wealth. In fact, it's gone up since we've been speaking on this show. Great, eh? I've not even done anything except talk.
So
And my
then
wealth's gone up.
we talk about obviously the money banked into the property value and things. So what about capital gains then? If people will be thinking about, well, if they do sell the property or the rental home, their capital gains, because obviously it will attract capital gains
Yeah.
when you sell.
So this is why it's important to think about actually how you set this up in the beginning.
Okay.
If you're going to sell and exit eventually, and you're probably going to be a high rate payer at that time, then you're probably going to want to exit through a limited company.
Okay.
Possibly, it depends on your taxation. So here's the differences here. If you do it in your own name and then you go to sell it, the gains calculated, you can either be a low rate taxpayer at 18%, you could be a high rate taxpayer paying 28% at this point in time. If you do it for a limited company, you'll be paying the corporation tax rate, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 20% on that gain when you sell. So 20%. But then you'll be taking out dividends more than likely because you'll be the shareholder,
Company,
and
yeah.
that'll be taxed at 8.75%. So it's like for like. But what I would say, I don't think you pay. No, you don't. You don't pay capital gains tax straight away on a corporation tax when you sell a property, but you do on your personal name. So you've got to do it within 30 days. So you lose the value of that. So if you time it right and you sell it and conclude exactly at that time for the next tax year, yeah, you have to pay it in 30 days whether you like it or not in your own name. But if you do it for the next tax year and get it right in the next tax year for your corporation tax, then you've got a whole year to use that gain to reinvest and make more money out of it before you actually pay the tax on it. That's a good point.
Yeah,
So you could actually, I have that sort of strategy sometimes. It's like I could buy more properties, generate more income, which will, by the time it gets to the end of the year, it will pay the tax bill on what I've bought the properties for
yeah.
with the deposit I've used. So it will pay that tax bill anyway. So it's a no-brainer. So if you understand how everything works in terms of the cash flow and how it all flows through, and you're able to extrapolate that, to the further down the road, then you'll know exactly what you should be doing every single time. I should just run master classes in this, shouldn't I?
I was just going to say, a lot of people that may not just fall into place easy in their mind, and they might not have that thought process or the knowledge to know that. So it's always the right idea to speak to the right people who do.
Get a good accountant. Get a good accountant. Unfortunately, you'll not get me unless you pay for me.
Yeah, I was just going to get a good financial or accountants person.
But an accountant, it knows property very, very well, but they don't know your circumstances. And this is why it's probably you need one that's done it already to understand how it all fits in.
Yeah.
So if you've not got an accountant, it's not a property investor. If you've got an accountant, it's not a property investor. And they're really going to know all the different things that they should be doing in order to mitigate your tax liability. And they're really going to understand that if they're not a big investor, if they're still active, if they're not currently still actively investing in property, and are they going to get it? Possibly not. That's maybe not an accountant. Now, my accountant is completely different because I'm an accountant by trade. I've studied all this, and I still study, and we're actually going to talk about it on the Wealth Creation Show, Become a Student of Life, aren't we?
Yeah.
So there's your plug for Wealth Creation Show at 12:30 on Monday. Become a Student of Life. And this is what I am. So I still continue to learn about all the different ways that you can mitigate your tax liability. And I'm always a student of that. And I still question my accountant about different scenarios and different situations and what would be the result of that. How much money would be left in the company? How much money would be in my pocket? And how much tax would that cost overall to do that way? And then I say, what if I do it the other way and I do it like this? What would be the scenario? How much would be for me? How much would be the company? And how much would be tax it would be paying? And then I work out the best case scenario and the most minimal tax possible and what situation and track to follow in order to mitigate the tax liability.
Yeah.
And often it's just didn't sell ever.
Yeah.
And that's why you need a limited company to be able to pass it on in trust. Because you'll be able to pass the shares on in some shape or form through a trust, and therefore it'll pass to the next generation without any liability, because the limited company is a legal entity in its own right, and therefore the trust has the ownership of the shares, but not the company. The company still does business with the bank, therefore that won't affect that either. And the trustees are generally the people that could possibly the people are actually getting the money, the benefactors of the money as a result of that.
Yeah.
But then trust taxation comes into play as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right, Jim, and really good insights there on that side of things. And I think people do, when they're faced with additional expenses and that, just sometimes jump straight to selling. And even if you're not that keen on the idea of extra expenses, we've just demonstrated there, it could really mean that you're financially better off. So I think before you jump to the let's sell up decision, maybe grab your calculator and obviously exercise what we've just been through there and see if selling up really is in your best interest, or speak to somebody who will be able to advise you whether it's in your best interest, because you could really be selling up and letting go of a really good asset.
I've seen it every time.
Yeah,
I've seen it loads of times where people actually, and I'm going, why are you selling? It's like, my God, what are you selling for? And they're going, no, I desperately need it because of this, that, or this. And I went, are you sure? You're definitely selling? Yeah, I'm definitely. I'll have it then. And you know that because I've bought it. I've done that in the past. Well,
yeah,
a few landlords are actually, well, no, I definitely want rid of them because of this. And it's something that's happening in their life. It's so chaotic. And I'm like, I would not be selling. So after trying to convince them no to sell, they're like, no, I'm definitely selling. Well, just give it. I'll buy it. I'll definitely buy it.
Yeah,
definitely buy it. And you've seen that lately.
Yeah,
you know that you probably know the 6 that I bought off a lady maybe a couple of years back, and it's like, oh my God, I got them for that price.
I know.
It's like,
good
I cannot believe that.
And
it's like they probably got.
She was so happy, and that was what she wanted to do, and that was fine. But
And I'm like, are you nuts? I wouldn't be selling. For God's sake, keep them. They'll pay dividends in the years to come. And it's like, no. And they've gone up by about 20% since then. And then the rents have gone up by about, I think, about 30% since then as well, to the normal market rents.
Yeah.
And that was only a couple of years ago.
I know.
And I'm like, and that was good as it stood at that time, and she was making a good return on investment. And yet, oh God, why are you selling? Don't sell.
We've done a refurb on one of them, and I think a couple of repairs now, but we've not put a great deal of money into them because you didn't need to.
No, definitely no. Yeah, crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. I don't understand why people are selling. I don't understand why people are getting out the market. I just don't get it. The writing is on the wall for it's the let the good times roll. So I think your answer is it's still worth being a landlord. Absolutely, if you know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing, absolutely. If you understand it, you will be a landlord. You will be investing all your money in property as well every single time. If you understand how to do it correctly, it is the best returning asset class I've ever seen. Every single time.
Yeah.
You tell me any other thing over the period of the last 50 years, it's outperformed property, and you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to tell me anything over the last 50 years that's outperformed property, because property has won hands down every single time. And in the next 50 years, property will still be in the same situation. It will still be the best performing asset class when all your Apples have disappeared and all the rest of it. They've all disappeared. The Apple will only be no more probably in 50 years' time. Microsoft probably wouldn't be existing as Microsoft anymore. All these different companies that you're seeing right now will no longer exist probably in 50 years' time. They'll be taken over, or they'll go out of business. They'll go. Look at classic example. Whoever thought VHS would disappear?
Yeah.
Whoever thought videotape would disappear? No one. No one saw that coming. Whoever thought YouTube would be the biggest television channel in the world?
Mm-hmm.
Well, BBC and STV were busy fighting it out to see who's the biggest. YouTube stole their lunch.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So if you understand the mega trends that are coming in the future and how that could be useful to what you're doing, you will invest in certain sectors because you understand what's coming. AI is not going to save you, by the way. AI is just going to create more jobs.
Yeah,
that's all it's going to do.
And it's true what you say. I mean, property, it's always going to be around. We're always going to need somewhere to live. So
everybody needs a roof over their head, and unfortunately, The government's not been able to sort that one out yet, and I don't think they will ever be able to sort that one out as the population continues to multiply at an exponential rate. We're now at 8 billion people. There's more people living, there's more people being born every single year than I think there's died in the whole lifetime of the earth since records began. That's a frightening statistic.
Yeah, that is.
There's more people born every single year than there has died since records began.
That's crazy.
That's why we need another planet. Look at 8 billion. Imagine if 8 billion just produced one each. 16 billion, just like that. We'll be promoting Logan's Run next. Carousel. 30-year-old, you're going to a different place. Convince everybody you're going. All these different things. There's lots of different opportunities on the horizon, but I definitely, my one's always property, and I'll stick with it. I won't deviate from it for that reason.
I mean, we've covered quite a lot today, and we've kind of branched off from exactly net zero lettings. So anything that we've covered today, if anybody's got any questions, jump it in the comments. Even if it's on the rerun, we will pick them up. If you are concerned specifically about net zero lettings, there isn't always one size that fits all when it comes to that. So if you need any advice or anything, I'd love to help. If I can, or point you in the right direction, my number and my email address and things are attached to the blog in this post. So feel free to reach out. And as Jim says, we'll be back. We're doing the Wealth Creation Show on Monday at 12:30, and that is going to be Become a Student of Life. So that'll be quite an interesting one. So please join us then.
Perfect. Okay, bye-bye for now.
Okay. Thanks for that, Jim, and thanks for everyone for watching.